In the last video, we had seen the mechanism behind the working of friction. So we had seen that friction occurs due to the surface irregularities. What do you mean by irregularities? These the roughness of the surface. So there are some the surface is not perfectly smooth, and there are some irregularities or roughness on the surface that causes interlocking between the two surfaces in contact, which in this case is the table and the duster, and that interlocking causes friction, which opposes motion when I try to push something, and when something is moving, that friction tries to stop that object. Now let us look at the two factors upon which friction is dependent upon, and the first factor is, well, the surface itself. So here we have two surfaces actually, because we have two objects, the table and the duster, in contact, and therefore we have to look at the two surfaces that are in contact, and the amount of friction will depend on the type of surface or the types of surfaces that you are taking. So let us first of all look why should this happen, and then I'll just show you a few demonstrations of how it actually happens in real life. So imagine, let's say I have a slab of glass which is very smooth, and let's say I have two slabs of glass in fact. So both the pieces are very smooth, and if you place one on top of each other, because glass is very smooth, the irregularities will be minimal, very minimum, and therefore the two surfaces will not interlock so much. So let's say these are the two slabs. See, the roughness, obviously the roughness will always exist, nothing is perfectly smooth, but yeah, if you have something as smooth as glass, let's say, the interlocking and the roughness will not be so much, and therefore, see, because the roughness is not so much, the two can slide pretty easily against each other, and there will be not much interlocking, and therefore the amount of friction will be low because the two surfaces are smooth. Therefore we can see that smooth surfaces, if your something is smooth, then the friction is low. So that is one case, because if something is smooth, you have less irregularities, and those low irregularities will allow those, so because the irregularities are less, there will be less interlocking, and that will allow easier sliding of two objects, and the friction will be low. On the other hand, if you take two objects such as the tire of a car, or any other the tire of a cycle, let's say, or the tire of a car which has grooves made on them, so we'll learn in the coming modules why the tires are made such. But yeah, you can see that tires are not very smooth, and they are purposely made rough. And let's take the example of, let's say, some road or some other path that is pretty rough. So if you look at some road, the road has a lot of irregularities on it, right? And if we have another object which has a lot of irregularities, like a tire or anything else that a lot of irregularities, you can see that because the two surfaces are rough, they have a lot of irregularities, and these irregularities can very easily lock into each other. So it is very easy, they'll interlock like they'll interlock like two gears interlock, right, this way, and that will cause very tight interlocking, and it will produce a lot of friction. So friction will be high in this case, because the two objects cannot slide so easily one on top of each other. So what we learn from this is that if we have a rough surface, then the friction will be high. So what we can learn from this simple explanation is that smooth surfaces have low friction and rough surfaces have high friction. So the reason being, once again I'll just repeat, in cases of rough surfaces we have a lot of interlocking, and therefore the two objects cannot slide easily one on top of each other, whereas in smooth surfaces we have less interlocking, less irregularities, and therefore less friction. So that is the simple logic. Now let us quickly go through a few demonstrations to actually see whether this is true or not. So first we'll look at smooth surfaces and we'll see if we have low friction or not, and then we can have a look at rough surfaces and then see if we have high friction or not. So here I have a very simple demonstration to show you that surface can influence the frictional force between two objects. So here I'm taking the same object so that the mass of the object and other properties remain the same. And here I have a pretty smooth surface, which is my floor. Not very smooth, but obviously it is decently smooth, as you'll see later. And now if I give it a slight kick with my feet, see what happens to the duster. Just observe this. So it travels this amount of distance before it comes to a stop, and it's coming to a stop because of the frictional force. The higher the frictional force that I have, the faster the duster will come to a stop. So here the duster could travel this distance before coming to a stop. Now let us look at another case where the surface is much more rough. Here I'm outside my house, and here this surface is very rough, and so now let us put the duster here on this surface and let me give it a similar kick, and let us observe what happens on such a surface when I give it a kick with the same amount of force. Watch. So it comes to a stop very quickly, and if you feel that I did not push it sufficiently hard enough, you can try this out yourself, and you can observe. See, it is much harder to move this duster on this surface as compared to a smoother surface, and this is something that you can try very easily on your own, and you'll realize. And obviously you might have experienced this earlier also. If you try to move on a very smooth surface, you can very easily slip on a smooth surface, but on the other hand, if you move on a rough surface, it is less probable that you'll slip. Like you might have slipped in your classrooms where you have tiles, but it is less easier to slip on your ground, and that is why roads and grounds are rough, so that you don't slip. So that's it for this video, and I hope you've got the basic idea that friction depends on the type of surface or the nature of surface that is in consideration. That's it for this video.